Good afternoon. Welcome to the College of Continuing Professional Studies webinar, Building Trust and Credibility. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Guest and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about the webinar or other programs that we offer, please contact the Information Center. Contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. There are some logistical items that I'd like to address before we begin. I ask that you please submit your questions through the webinar so we can address them during the Q&A portion in the last 5 minutes of this presentation. To submit your questions, select the Q&A button in the top right-hand corner and type your question and press send. You can see the Q&A button in the top right corner and the send button at the bottom. We will send an email in the next few days with a link to the recording of the webinar. The link will be sent to the email address that you submitted during the registration. A lack of trust can jeopardize any situation because it is the foundation of productive collaborations and retaining clients. In its 2016 Global CEO Survey, Pricewaterhouse Coopers reported that 55% of the CEOs think the lack of trust is a threat to their organization's growth. You need trust to address sensitive issues and navigate conflicting interests with team members and customers alike. This webinar, Building Trust and Credibility, will provide you with insights and tips on building and enhancing your trustworthiness for workplace benefits and job satisfaction. In this webinar, instructor Carolyn Moores will explore Stephen Covey's trust-building behaviors and how to apply them on the job, Kouzes and Posner's 6 A's for restoring credibility to help you restore trust, and insights into more trustworthiness-enhancing techniques from renowned researchers and authors. Please join me in welcoming Carolyn Moores.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate the introduction, and welcome to everyone who is listening in. Building trust and credibility. Now, oftentimes we know, or we think we know, when we can trust someone, and it's oftentimes kind of intuitive. It has to do with likability and warmth, but I would like to put a little more science and behavioral background to how to build, but especially how to restore trust and credibility if that were necessary, because I think we can all agree it's easier to destroy trust and credibility than it is to create, let alone restore it once it's been damaged. And of course, I don't know exactly what field you're in, what position you're in, but trust and credibility are crucial in any field, job, and relationship. And even though there are no silver bullets, I will indeed be attending to these 3 objectives that Michael already mentioned. So I have a question for you. Do you ever feel like this little guy or girl, kind of panicky after something has been misinterpreted, misunderstood, or some kind of mistake, or maybe even a failed project is being put on your shoulders? So whenever we discuss a topic, I like to address the what, the why, and the how. So the why of trust and credibility, maybe you are part of one or more virtual teams, which means that you don't always have immediate and in-person access to people, which means you don't know them as well as if you were to be in the same building and at the same level or even the same room. Maybe a colleague is consistently questioning your actions or your decisions, and you wonder how you can create more of a trusting relationship and increase the credibility with that person. Maybe you lack experience for a new project that you're really excited about, but you do know that the level of credibility might be a little lower since you've never worked on this size project or in this area. It could also be that there was some kind of a mistake that you were involved in, which resulted in a dissatisfied client, or there could be a lack of transparency on your team for whatever reason. It could be organizational culture. It could be a restructuring of the team. And then lastly, something that a lot of people that I work with ask me about is how to increase trust and credibility with people that you may have to lead or influence, for example, on project teams that you do not have hierarchical authority over. Of course, there are many more ways to be building and restoring trust and credibility. Think alone about the world of fake news and social media manipulation. But to keep this a positive webinar, let's not go into that topic. So, after the why, I would like to address the what of trust and credibility. There's a couple of terms that are very related to these two concepts. One is reliability, and as I'm sure you realize, reliability has everything to do with being able and capable to perform consistently according to certain standards that others and you have set. Then there is the element of sincerity, which means being free from deceit or hypocrisy. And of course, that part of that is in the eye of the beholder. Maybe you know that you're not deceiving anyone, but the main thing is that the person who you are collaborating with or serving, if it is a client, perceives you to be free from deceit. And then there is commitment, and we'll talk more about that, of course, later, but commitment is being truly dedicated to a cause and a client, but even more so to an outcome. So commitment and dedication have everything to do with accountability, in my view, because it is not just about being committed to a list of tasks, but to the outcome that you're creating, either for the team, for your boss, or for the client. So if we take these three elements and then look at what the dictionary tells us about trust and credibility, trust is a firm belief that others have about your reliability, your willingness and capability to speak the truth, and literally also in your abilities to get the job done and in your strength to deal with whatever hurdle may arise. Then credibility is the quality of being convincible and believable, and much of that has to do with communication, much of that has to do with the way you present yourself. So, of course, there are all kinds of outside influences on trust and credibility. One is organizational differences. Some organizations are set up to be more transparent with very clear processes and procedures, and maybe even with a very accountable a large amount of accountable practices, which makes it easier for you to act and be trustworthy and acting in a credible way. There are individual differences. For some of us, it may come a little more natural to present ourselves in a way that is generally being perceived as trusting. And then there are a lot of cultural differences too. How you define trust and credibility, of course, if you maybe Google these terms in a different language, whether it is my first language being Dutch or the German language or the Thai language, you will get different elements to these two terms. So keep in mind that whatever you or I define as being trust and credibility may be different for people that you may collaborate with from other continents or even other subcultures. So I would like you to be mindful of that. We can never impose our own definition on others. That should be a topic of conversation. So I would like you to either agree or disagree, of course, but think about the following assumptions that are maybe the foundation of this whole webinar. People depend on your expertise and advice. So I'm not saying you are all in an advisory situation, but you've been hired for a certain position and they depend on you to be applying your expertise and your abilities and your knowledge. And that dependability makes for a lot of trust to be necessary. Also, people draw conclusions from your conduct, from your behavior. So how you show up matters. So set aside your expertise. If you are not able to portray your expertise and your capabilities by the way you show up, by the behavior when you enter a room or when you start a meeting, that could lead to problems. Thirdly, people make first impressions very quickly. So whenever you're new to a team, new in a department, new with a client, new with a coworker, I'm sure you realize that first impressions are really made very quickly. There are several research studies out there. Some say it happens in the first couple of seconds. Now, that never means that if the first impressions that you leave is not a good one, that, oh gosh, totally lost. I will never be able to restore that trust and credibility. Absolutely not. But it does matter. And then fourthly, and maybe most importantly, people, which includes you, if you are even just a little bit human, we are imperfect. So that means along the line, regardless of your level of expertise and your years of experience, you and I will make mistakes, small and big. Hopefully they're all unintended, because otherwise we have a different problem on our hand. But unintended mistakes also hurt trust and credibility. But it's a fact of life that we will make them. So if, again, you're even just a little bit human, you will likely find it hard to admit to mistakes. And that is partially because we all get up in the morning wanting to be successful people, wanting to do good. And our ego, which is part of our psychological makeup, is constantly asking, even though we don't realize it, is how will this make me look? And a mistake doesn't make us look good. So it worries us, and we are tempted oftentimes to blame, to find excuses, or to try and hide the mistake. So why does this all matter? How you show up, how you interact with people within your organization, with the public, with clients, and how you amend for mistakes, that all matters greatly. So let's move to one of the well-known researchers and authors on trust. And his name is Stephen M.R. Covey. He is the son of the late Stephen Covey, and you may have heard of his book, which is called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so his son is in a similar field and wrote the book The Speed of Trust. And Stephen M.R. Covey says there are 4 core elements of trust. One is the integrity, which again relates to the honesty, the truthfulness, which is basically referring to the behavior that you portray, which people know is based on strong moral principles. And strong moral principles sound very appealing and very easy until you have to make tough decisions. The second element is intent. So I'm sure you've had experiences where whatever you intended to portray or do with your actions, decisions, or communication wasn't equal to the impact that it had for the person who you were either collaborating with or who was on the receiving end of your decision or action or the product that you delivered. So we need to make sure that if there is a gap between intent and impact, that we go back to the intent that we had, that we communicate that, because people want to know that they can trust our motives even if they misinterpreted our actions or our decisions. So it's really about the agenda that drives your behavior. Then, of course, there was the capabilities part. We already addressed that, the skills, the attitudes, the knowledge that you all need to accomplish your daily tasks. And with all of that, you create results. So Stephen Covey talks about results and a track record based on 3 elements: your past results, your current results, but even anticipated performance, which is kind of weird to call that a track record. But Stephen Covey says with your present and past results, even though you may be moving into a different field, we can kind of get some sense of how successful you will be because of your learning agility, because of how accountably you have acted in the past. So these are the 4 areas that you want to reflect on and ask yourself as you want to build stronger trusting relationships, or maybe even restore trust. Which of these 4 elements, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, should I be emphasizing most? Now, I want to reference a different study. I already mentioned in the introduction that communication is a huge part of establishing trust and credibility. There is a interesting Fiske Lab by Susan Fiske from Princeton University, and she has done this particular study with Sidney Dupree, and they talk about communication credibility, and I don't think there's anything new on here. It has to do with communicator warmth, likability, and trustworthiness, which is the motivation to be truthful, but also the way you present yourself to people. And if we think about the world of law, the world of politics, the world of direct client contact, we all know how important it is for people to be able to establish a level of warmth and likability. And that's not to say that if you're likable and warm with others, it doesn't matter, of course, whether you speak the truth. Absolutely, it matters, but people will believe you faster, quicker, easier if they perceive you to be warm and likable. And then, of course, the second element of communicator credibility has to do with that competence and expertise, but also how you are able to portray that and present that. So even for people who are in a new field or adding some new tasks or responsibilities to their job, it is up to you to establish a relationship between what you did before and how that relates to the new tasks and responsibilities. So just to make clear, communication is a great part of being credible and trustworthy, and as I'm sure you have learned in communication workshops, there are a couple of things that you need to do, especially 3 things. You want to be clear, you want to be accurate, and the communication has to be relevant. If you adhere to all 3 of those, then that automatically means that you add value. So I already mentioned the word accountability. When you communicate with someone, it may be very tempting to accuse the other person if they misinterpret your intent or your words. And so this fun cartoon shows that you can blame someone else for not getting it or for their brain not working really well. But it is my assumption and my strong belief that if you want to act accountable and be a trustworthy person, then there is only one person responsible for the impact of your communication, and that is you. So the burden of clarity and of the effectiveness of communication is always on you, the communicator. That is not to say that some people, if they are not paying attention or are ill-intentioned themselves, that they don't play a role in any kind of communication struggles and tension. However, you can only change one person. So if this were a live session, I would ask you, please all raise your hand if you think you can still change your loved one or the teenager. And of course, we all try, but the only impact that we have on changing someone is ourselves. And that is difficult enough as it is. So I think we should hold ourselves accountable for the communication and the impact that it has. So you're here probably for some practical tips, right? So Stephen Covey has, in his book, The Speed of Trust, has defined 13 behaviors that can help you establish or increase the trust. And many of these are common sense, and so there may not be much new, but what I would like you to do in the next couple of minutes is look at this list, and I'll explain them a little bit, and ask yourself, what are the 3 behaviors that I'm already showing a lot of and that come natural and easy to me, and which are the 3 that may be most difficult for me, and especially in your present situation. So this may change from one job or one organization to the other, right? So the first one is talk straight. Now, being from the Netherlands, I don't know what you know about the Dutch people, but we are known to be a little bit more direct and candid than some other people. So talk straight comes relatively natural to me, and it's about being honest and telling the truth. However, if you go overboard in being candid or talking straight, of course, it can come across as rude. So it has to be meaningful straight talk, and meaningful as defined by the people that you're collaborating with or that you're serving. But it's all about being trustworthy in the information that you provide and in the conversations that you have. The second one is demonstrate respect. Let's stick to the left column. Demonstrating respect really is showing that you care for your boss's success, for your team members, for your clients and their products and their interests. So demonstrating respect, a couple of small things how you do that is looking people in the eyes, showing interest, asking them questions, remembering things about them. It's these very small elements that you and I know so very well to do and how important they are, but you want to ask yourself, how often do I really pay attention to these small elements? The third one is creating transparency. So this is connected to talking straight, but it is being open and authentic and erring on the side of disclosure. So not withholding information from others, sharing openly so that you help others be successful, whether it is team members, clients, other departments. So, and also asking them, what else is it that you need from me? Whether it is in information, timelines, when you're working on deadlines. So make sure that you share and err on the side of disclosure. Number 4, we already addressed making mistakes a little bit, and if you're human, that it may be wrong to admit to them, which also hampers righting wrongs, but think about it. Trust has everything to do not with just avoiding mistakes, which would be great, but even more so once a mistake is being discovered, that you hold yourself accountable and that you right that wrong. So you want to apologize quickly and sincerely, and we'll talk more about that later. Sincerely means from the heart. You don't want to cover things up and you don't want to do a fake apology, but we'll talk about that. Next, show loyalty. So you want to acknowledge the contributions of others. You want to share credits openly. You want to compliment people openly rather than wanting to take the credit yourself. It makes you much more trustworthy, regardless of whether you are in a leadership position or not, if you share credit and if you compliment others openly. And of course, delivering results. Covey says accomplishing what you've been asked to do and not using any excuses for not delivering. And if you cannot deliver, communicating as soon as you can what is keeping you from delivering and what you need and when you will be able to accomplish the task or finish the report or finish whatever element of the project you are responsible for. So let's go to the next half. Getting better has everything to do with having a learning mind, continuously being focused on improving and being proactive in seeking out feedback. Now, if you're anything like me and like 90% or more of the people, then when we seek feedback, what we usually do is we go and seek out people who think like us. And maybe you're nodding yes now, and that is very common. There's nothing either good or bad about it, but if you think about it, it doesn't really make much sense to go to people who think like us, because if I need feedback, I should really go to people who I may not always like that much or may not always agree that much with, because they would truly add a different perspective. So if you want to get better at things, you want to go to people who act differently, think differently, have a different approach, and generally those are the people that you don't always like that much. Of course, there has to be a basic level of trust between you and the person. If you have a strong interpersonal allergy against that person, then I don't propose you go to them, but I challenge you to go seek out contrarians and not just echo chambers, yes men and yes women. The next one, confront reality. This requires some courage. So you want to deal with issues and especially those undiscussables. And there is no way for me to know what the undiscussables would be in your department, in your field of expertise, or even in your organization. But reflect on what are the kind of things that we don't talk about, which may harm trust between departments, which may create silos, or which may harm the trust between you and the internal or external clients that you're serving. Next element, the next behavior is clarifying expectations. Now, especially if you're in some kind of supervisory or leadership position, this one is important, but also if you're not leading anyone, clarifying expectations, revealing them and validating them so that others know what to expect of you, because they can only trust for you to deliver if it's being agreed upon what it is that you're delivering, what the quality standards are, what the timelines are, etc. Next, we already discussed practicing accountability, taking responsibility for the results or the outcomes, so not just the tasks or not just whatever is written in your job description, but actually whatever outcome other team members or clients require of you. Of course, for that you need to be able to keep your commitments, and many times we're dependent on other people, whether it is different departments, team members, people that work remotely. So keeping commitments can be much more complicated than just these two words on this slide, but it is really still saying what you're going to do and then do what you say you were going to do. This means that you have to have strong collaboration with people that you're dependent upon, and again, being very clear if you are not getting what you need from others, that you influence them, and this would be a whole different webinar, of course, but you want to make sure that you keep your end of the commitment. And then extend trust is basically have a propensity to trust others, trust in their positive intent until proven otherwise. So there was, of course, the third one missing. In Stephen Covey's list, this is not number 13, nor it is number 1. I would like to make listen number 1, number 13, and actually everything in between, because I truly believe, just like Stephen Covey's dad did, that listening comes first and last. So if you did read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you may remember one of those habits is seek to understand before you seek to be understood. Now, if you let that sink in, seek to understand means you have to ask questions, to listen, to get to the core of what someone else is thinking and wanting and needing before you want them to get you and to understand your perspective. So listen first and last. And of course, listening is very easy, right? Because we do it all day long. But it's one of those things that, if I may be completely honest with you and just blame it on me being direct Dutch, you and I are often lousy listeners. And I don't like admitting to that, but there are so many things that our brain is doing. So I don't know whether you know, we have like 98 billion brain cells that make trillions of connections, and we get distracted I think by now it's like every 8 or 9 minutes, and apparently some researchers in Canada have found out that goldfish have a longer attention span than we humans do. So that's kind of disappointing, but we get distracted so often by our own experiences, our own needs, being hungry, tired, upset, happy. We get distracted by all kinds of cognitive biases that I'm sure you are a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, familiar with. There are all kinds of thinking processes going on that are supposed to help us get to the core quicker and to help us make shortcuts in our thinking and decision making and in our processing of information. But at the same time, a lot of things can go wrong. So look at this list and please circle one that you know you are guilty of regularly, whether it is assuming, filtering, judging people too quickly without really listening or asking questions. Maybe it is that you advise more than you're listening. Maybe you're getting distracted by your response. So maybe you are being quiet, but you're not really listening because you're working on your rebuttal as if you were in a court of law. And sometimes we jump to conclusions. Now, there are many other unhelpful listening habits, but please, what are you one or two biggest ones? And if there are others that you can think of, write them down and make sure that they are in the front of your mind whenever, especially, there is suspicion that the person may doubt your credibility or has difficulty trusting your expertise or your capabilities. Especially then, listening is crucially important. So to turn the what not to do into some tips for effective listening. And I know you know all this, but the question is, do you actively practice it? So delaying judgment. And one way to do that, if we skip to the third one, shut up just a little longer. And I'm not supposed to say shut up, of course, so I could also say be quiet a little longer. But sometimes we're so quick, even if we are not talking, we're so quick to let our thinking brain take over, and we're not present in the moment anymore, really trying to grasp what the person is saying. And if we are quick to judge and to conclude, we allow that internal chatter to take over, and generally we listen to our own story with much more focus than to other people's stories. And I'm thinking of a quote by the Dalai Lama, and he said, whenever you talk, you're just affirming what you already know, but when you listen, really listen, you may actually learn something new. You don't learn something new by talking, so remember that one. I think it's very difficult to do, but very true. One very good listening skill is to summarize in your own words what you heard, and I'm sure you know about this one. Also know your biases and work consciously to minimize them. And your biases have to do with your own stories, and it relates to the last one. Refrain from what I call autobiographical listening, which is putting your own experiences aside rather than letting them take over. And this relates to the advising. So I'm sure you've had a situation where someone was supposed to be listening to something that you said, and they immediately started giving you advice, probably with good intentions, but maybe that was not what you were looking for. So if we move back to trust and creating some self-awareness and doing a self-assessment. Just quickly go through these 8 statements, and I'm not going to read them because you can do this very well. It's based on Nan Russell. She talks about a couple of more statements, and I changed some of them. I inserted one of my own, but ask yourself how you score on these. Are they more true for you or more false? And make sure that you are, of course, completely honest with yourself. It's real easy to deceive ourselves and think that we score great on each and every one of them. I know that I can certainly influence people much stronger with my action than words, but words is a lot easier, right? So I hope you took some time to self-assess yourself which ones of these you can do better at. So we promised in one of the objectives for this webinar to talk about what to do when things have gone wrong. So many things could have gone wrong, right? Maybe you relied on someone to provide you with input for some project, and even though it was well-intentioned and the person didn't realize it at the time, but maybe the information was incomplete or inaccurate, and so now you have a project delay. Or maybe you took a decision about a solution for a problem, and in hindsight it turns out that it's totally not the right decision. Or maybe you misjudged how someone would take your feedback or your instructions, and you thought you knew that they were going to take it well, but now they're upset and they think you maybe embarrass them in front of other people, in front of the team, and you have to start rebuilding that trust. So Kouzes and Posner, in their book Credibility, I think it's from 1993, but still very current, they talk about practicing the 6 A's of restoring credibility. So the first one is accept personal responsibility. That means you say to yourself, I made a mistake, or I misjudged it, or I neglected to check something. I should have done this, that, and the other, but I didn't. So I suppose I could now blame such and such, but it is really my fault. So I take personal responsibility. You want to do that in your internal narrative, but probably also towards the person or the people that it affects. Second, you admit publicly, as I already alluded to, that you made the mistake. Now, I'm not saying you have to shout it from the roofs and make sure that everyone knows that you made such a big mistake, but to the people that it matters to. Maybe at the team meeting, you want to tell people, you know, I could blame this, that, or the other, but I am holding myself responsible for this. Of course, the next step is to apologize sincerely and clearly. Sincere means that you show you understand how it is causing problems for other people on the team or for the clients. The fourth element is acting with a response to deal with the possible consequences. So what is it now that you have to do? Generally, if you want to quickly restore trust and credibility, you want to provide a very quick response to deal with the consequences. And so maybe you can say something to the effect of, in order to make this as easy as possible or to fix this as quickly as possible, here is what I'm suggesting. Do you have additional ideas or other thoughts? Let's see, amending for the mistake and participating in possible hardships. So this means even if you're not involved in, let's say you have to put in data, different data, and it's not your responsibility or it's not your task, but it's your team, and they made a mistake due to your decision, but now they have to do extra work. It is generally very helpful and helps create that trust if you are willing to pull up your sleeves and to work, even though it may not be your task. And then the last one is be attentive. Ask for feedback, how people feel that you dealt with the mistake. Ask how you can best support them, and ask them, is there anything else other than what we've already discussed that I can do to make this work as best as we can? And sometimes it's even okay to literally say, to help rebuild your trust, even if they haven't said that they lost trust in you. Because by literally verbalizing that, you show that you really care about being a trustworthy person. So some in-the-moment awareness, whenever you notice that trust or credibility might be at stake because of some mistake or some misjudgment, ask yourself, during this conversation or team meeting where I'm trying to hold myself responsible and amend for the mistake, how am I showing up right now? And how may my words and my behavior be perceived, but could they also be misperceived? And remember the possible difference between intent and impact, right? You may have the best intentions with the words that you're choosing, but you want to be a careful observer of whoever you're talking with. And now, of course, if you have a virtual meeting, it's difficult because if there is no visual, you cannot see the person. So if you're dealing with mistakes, failures, and having to course correct, and you have to do that by phone or with virtual teams, I always suggest you do that with a visual. So you want to use a medium where you can see each other, because you do want to have some nonverbal feedback on how whatever you're saying and proposing, how that is being received. The third one does what I do and how I do it inspire belief and confidence, and that is up again to the beholder, right? It's in the eye of the beholder, just like beauty and just like mistakes, etc. are. So that is not just up to you to decide. And the last one, and I like this, it's a help or harm question. It's a question you can quickly ask yourself right before you're about to say or do something. Is what I'm about to say or do, is it likely going to help or hurt the situation? And especially when you feel you are doing everything right in amending for the mistake and apologizing and holding yourself accountable, if the persons or people still don't seem satisfied, or you cannot really sense that they get what you're trying to accomplish and see that you're really working hard to deliver the right results, it may be very tempting to still start blaming them or to get frustrated or angry, and we all know that usually doesn't get us anywhere. So I always, when I feel my level of frustration going up, I have the help harm sign. I have a little sign at my office desk, and it is it's a traffic light with two signs, help harm, and I just visualize that, and that usually keeps me from blurting out things that I later regret, even though I may feel in the moment that I have all the right to do this. So I have a AAA of personal effectiveness for you. And it doesn't even matter whether we talk about trust and credibility or anything else, whether it is learning how to hold better presentations or being a better supervisor or know how to be effective in meetings. There is a AAA, and it's very simple. The first A is awareness. Am I aware of how I am showing up right here and now in the moment? As well as, am I aware of the effect that someone else's words and behavior, maybe facial expressions, is having on me? The second one is holding myself accountable for whatever I say and don't say, I do and don't do. And the third one is the action that I actually put out there. So, are you willing to say, I own this and no one else? Are you willing to say, I will not hide behind excuses? You don't always have to verbalize that, but are you willing to say that internally? Are you willing to say, I will resist the blame temptation? Because people, we all know it's so tempting and easy to blame. And sometimes we can blame circumstances that no one can even check. I mean, in this day, the day and age of technology, it's so easy to say, oh, I never received that email, or my computer crashed, or there was a traffic jam. And it may be true or it may not be true, but does it even matter to the person? And especially if it is not true, even though no one may be able to check it, I think we all benefit from just being able to and confident enough to openly say, you know, I left too late. I apologize. So, your AAA of personal effectiveness in whatever area, awareness, accountability, and then the right action. Sounds easy, right? But it's not always. So, let's go back to apologizing. Now, a lot of people think apologizing is easy. Not always so. I have a 5C model for an apology, and there's nothing really complicated. It's not rocket science. But first of all, I have to feel courteous in order to be able to be courteous. So if I don't feel courteous, maybe I'm not ready for an apology yet. You want to be concise. Many times when you and I apologize, we still try and insert excuses or circumstances, and that usually doesn't feel like a true apology for the person who is listening to you. You want to be candid, so you want to be transparent about what elements have led to whatever mistake or failure or a scope problem or missed deadline, but you want to also be mindful that it doesn't sound or feel like an excuse or you blaming circumstances. Of course, and the two hands already show it, you want to bring it in a caring way, as in, I want to help you, team member, boss, client, be as successful, and I want to deliver for you, so I care about the product or the service or my role in the outcome, so that's why I apologize and I'm thinking of a remedy. And of course, an apology has to be very clear. And the last element, whatever response you're getting, work hard to listen without defending. And that is not always easy, as I'm sure you know from experience. So just quickly, some ineffective apologies. I'm sure you know this, and I'm sure you've been on the receiving end of ineffective apologies. The fake apology is one. It is the apology that is it's blaming packaged as an apology. So maybe you've heard yourself say to someone, I'm so sorry you misinterpreted my message. That is not an apology, because you're blaming the person for misinterpreting your message. And if you think about that little cartoon where I talked about communicator ownership, it is you who is responsible and accountable for the effect of your communication. The second one is the excessive apology. So this is people who extensively say, I'm so sorry that this went wrong. I'm so very sorry. Oh, I'm horrified. I apologize. I don't know how to say I'm sorry enough. And it's so horrible. And I didn't mean for this to happen. Blah, blah, blah. The problem with this apology is that you are almost forcing the person to feel sorry for you and to be saying, oh, it's not that bad, don't worry. And by that, you're drawing attention to you and to your feelings, which should never be your intent behind an apology. The emphasis should be on the person and what you will do for the client, the team member, the boss, or the other department to deliver on the results. The empty apology is the third one. It's knowing that you have to apologize, but you don't mean it because you're frustrated or you're angry with the person or with the circumstances. So you go through the motions, but it is very visible or audible that you don't really mean it. So it's all form and no substance. If you use the empty apology, you're harming the situation and trust and credibility more than anything else. So maybe you shouldn't say anything right there and then at all yet. And then the last one is apologizing for things that don't merit an apology. This dilutes the power of the real apology for when you need it. And many times people will do this when they are conflict avoidant, when they feel insecure about things, but be mindful that you don't apologize for something that doesn't merit it. So, I have a question for you. Do you agree or disagree? Your mistakes do not define you, unless, of course, you keep making the same mistake over and over again, because that means you don't learn anything. But we make mistakes in new situations, in new projects, in new circumstances. But failure to learn from those mistakes, that does define you. So maybe this, if this wasn't your assumption yet, may help you. I want to mention two more people, and then we're done with the meat of the presentation, and I will have some time for questions. But I want to reference a guy called Travis Bradbury. He is known, you may have heard of him from all his research and writing on emotional intelligence, just like Daniel Goleman is an authority on emotional intelligence. And in 2017, he wrote an interesting article, and it's called Grit, the 13 Things That Mentally Strong People Won't Do. Now, of course, you've already seen there are not 13 elements on here. I chose those from the article that I think relate to trust and credibility. Normally, I'm a positive psychology girl, so I like to read articles and share articles of people who talk about what to do and not what not to do. But I did relate to these because since we're all human, I think we can all recognize these. So mentally strong people who know how to deal with mistakes and failures and are willing to do what it takes to rebuild trust and credibility. They don't feel entitled. They don't beg for attention, such as with over-apologizing or excessive apologies. They don't close their minds, so they're open to someone else's perspective on how they perceive that you may have, maybe someone feels you've harmed trust in a way that you totally don't recognize, but people who don't close their minds are willing to honestly try and see things from that person's perspective. And I suddenly remember a quote by it's from a Sioux Indian prayer. It says, "Don't judge a person until you've walked in their moccasins for 2 weeks." So that's, for me, always a good reminder to not close my mind, to not quickly judge someone else's story, and to be open-minded, to listen and to ask questions. The next one is mentally strong people with a lot of grit. They don't feel sorry for themselves. They just act accountably. They may feel bad about having put in all the time and effort and still not having been able to deliver, but they just recuperate, get the job done, and learn as much as they can from whatever got them to this place. Mentally strong people don't stay in their comfort zone too long, it should say, because if you're constantly out of your comfort zone, that takes a lot of energy, and all that energy waste will hamper your learning. But we all know that if we've been in our comfort zone too long, we're probably not learning much, and we are probably not as passionate and as excited about our tasks and job anymore. The last two, mentally strong people don't wallow in grudges or envy, and especially if you feel that someone else may have played their role in the broken trust and in the problems that have been created. Like I said, we don't change other people. We can influence them. Only if they want to change, they will. And if I move away from grudges and envy and just focus on the influence that I have on my behavior and on my attitude and on my outcome, then I'm much more, not just mentally strong, but much more effective. And if you are a mentally strong person, you will never stop believing in yourself. So you can look up this article. It's available online. There is a lot more to it. And the last guy, from a totally different perspective, HubSpot founder Dharmesh Shah has written an article, I believe also in 2016, and it is called The 9 Qualities of Truly Confident People. And of course, if you want to rebuild trust and credibility, you need some confidence, right? And again, I've chosen a couple that I think relate to this topic best. He says, truly confident people freely ask for help. Now, if you think about building trust and credibility and wanting to be portraying expertise and being a capable person for your job, this may feel counterintuitive, but freely asking for help and being able to admit, okay, these are the things I know and these are the things I know how to do, but there's a couple of things I don't know yet and I'm very happy to learn quickly, so I'm asking you for help, for input, whether it is information or knowledge, or whether it is skills or some mentoring. It is a true show of confidence that you are willing to admit to those areas where you can still learn. I think we talked about listening already, right? But Dharmesh Shah has an interesting perspective. Listen 10 times more than you speak. Maybe we should do some research on that. I think most of us don't stick to this rule. I know if my kids were lined up here, they would be nodding, no, she doesn't, even though she has a strong background in psychology and communication. So ask yourself, to what extent do I listen more than I speak? The third one, truly confident people know how to duck the spotlight so it shines on others. Remember, this is giving the credit. It's related to one of the trust-building behaviors by Stephen Covey. They own their mistakes and aren't afraid to look silly. So owning mistakes is, again, that acting accountable that Stephen Covey talked about. And then they take a stand not because they think they are always right, but because they are not afraid to be wrong. So that too builds trust and credibility. Even if it turns out that I'm speaking out, I am thinking that I'm right in something, but then you as my team member, you have different information, a different perspective, you add during the meeting to whatever perspective I brought to the table, and I have to admit, your perspective I never considered, and you may be very right. That is not a sign of trust or confidence, a lack of others trusting or being able to have confidence in me. It's more a sign of I'm willing to take that risk. Now, if you or I speak up in team meetings or with clients and we're always wrong, then of course we have to ask ourselves, maybe I should do some more research and I should prepare a little better, because a lot of showing up as being trustworthy and credible is, of course, doing your homework, making sure you're prepared. So I assume in whatever job and role and level of the hierarchy you are operating at, that you do that. You do your homework, you prepare, you show up the best way you can. And if under those circumstances you find out that you were wrong, then if you can admit to that and truly say, oh, I'm so happy you brought that perspective to the table, I think I have to amend my opinion or my decision. That would be one of the signs, according to Dharmesh Shah and myself, of truly confident people. So, I hope that you remember that behavior and how you show up matters greatly. With each interaction, ask yourself, you're either harming or helping trust and credibility. So 5 last points of attention: be genuine and real, so that's that authenticity piece. Care, so that means you observe, you listen, you're attentive, but also you care for how you show up, how you portray professionalism, and basically in 2 areas, both the appearance, as in the way you dress yourself, but also, when I rush into a meeting room, do the stack of papers fall out of my hands and I have to stumble and fall over my own feet to pick them up, or is everything in a neat folder? All these simple things that you all know about, but also the little preparation and the homework you do. Fourth, provide excellent service, respond or fix things promptly. And providing excellent service could even be after contact with a team member or a boss or a client that you quickly send this brief message, whether it is an email or a text message. They may take like 15 or 20 seconds, just a brief text, thank you, or appreciated the meeting, or great information. Those are things that help build that trust and credibility because people know, oh, she or he really cares. And then, of course, showing appreciation for the business or for the project or for the collaboration, and especially with those departments or people where you find the collaboration can be hard with at times. So you want to especially compliment them and thank them and show your gratitude. So with that, I have a couple of resources for you. There are many more. Some of them are mentioned throughout the presentation, but these are the 4 books that I think you may find of great interest and practical value if you would like to dig into trust and credibility more. And with that, I wonder whether we have any questions.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. First question. Is there a recommended time frame for when an apology should be conveyed? Should someone apologize for an event that is far in the past?
Excellent question. So my rule of thumb is to apologize as quickly after the fact, after the act, but sometimes we don't find out until much later because it wasn't very clear that something went wrong or it wasn't communicated back to us. It depends a little bit on whether you were part of whatever requires an apology as well. So again, I would apologize as quickly as you can. If you know that the event happened quite some time ago, I would always choose to say something to the effect of, I wished I would have been able to apologize earlier or to address this issue earlier. I wasn't, for whatever reason. Maybe you want to mention the reason or maybe not. Depends on whether that harms your credibility. But I would verbalize that you would have wished you could have apologized earlier. I hope this helps.
Absolutely. So often we represent organizations and we don't necessarily make the mistake, but the organization does. How in this situation do we effectively apologize even though we didn't make the mistake?
Right, right. Yeah, and that is such an excellent question. So here it becomes very tailored, of course, right? So if you feel that others who did cause the problem could have prevented it and are now shying away from acting accountably, it may feel awkward and even very unfair to be putting out the apology. So it depends really on how much the trust and credibility are harmed, what the effect is of not apologizing. So maybe you do want to apologize for whatever your department or your organization has unintentionally, hopefully, right, unintentionally caused. So I would not take the blame if it is very clear that you didn't cause the problem. You can still provide an apology, a very sincere apology, and then focus more on how you or the department or your organization are going to amend and fix the problem. So whenever you haven't caused it and you feel it's maybe a little bit awkward or you don't want to take all the blame, you probably want to focus most on this is what we can do as a department or organization to help you get your product or the project or whatever it is that needs to happen, if that makes sense.
How can you find out what people think of your credibility, of your trustworthy level?
Repeat that, please.
Let me repeat that again. How can you find out what people think of your credibility or your level of trust or the level of trust they have in you?
Oh, excellent question. And I'm very thankful for that question because I did intend to mention that and I didn't. So ask for feedback, different parties, different people. And maybe it doesn't feel appropriate to be literally asking a client or a team member or a different department, so how credible do you think you are? But you can ask questions to the effect of, so these are the expectations you have of me. How do you feel I'm delivering? That could be a good question. Or is there anything that you would like to see improved or different in our collaboration? Is there anything that I haven't thought of in how I deliver? Is there anything that I can do to improve my service to you, whether it is to an internal or an external customer? So these are delivery and service-oriented questions that do not literally ask about feedback regarding trust and credibility, but you will find or you will get that input from people. Now, if you're new in a job and you want to literally know whether people think you have the capabilities and the knowledge, you may be in a position to ask how people perceive the fit between your knowledge and your level of experience and expertise and what it is they expect of you.
Great, thank you. And does showing an interest in a coworker's personal life help to install trust? And if so, how do you keep an appropriate boundary around this?
Yeah. So I'm thankful for the second part of the question too. So I'm a very social person, and so I'm immediately saying, yes, of course it helps establish trust. But remember that we talked about trust and credibility is also in the eye of the beholder. So you always, that's why I inserted a couple of awareness exercises. You always want to be aware of, I may enjoy others showing interest in my personal life, but do I think or can I sense whether that person enjoys me being interested in their personal life? And it's always better to err on the side of, yes, showing interest, but you want to be mindful and observant of how comfortable they are with your interest and your questions. Of course, the boundary, again, it depends on what you find appropriate as well as the person that you're thinking of right now. But in general, knowing more about a person always helps increase trust and credibility. But the extent to which you do that should be a collaboration between the two. Excellent questions.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for your time and the useful information. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending a link to the webinar recording in a couple of days. There are a few relevant courses listed on the slide if you would like to learn more. You can also visit our website at ccaps.umn.edu for a full list of classes and educational programs. Thank you for joining us today and have a wonderful afternoon.